There is a moment that permanently altered the internal power structure inside the Indiana Fever organization. It happened during a live timeout, in real time, on national television, in front of thousands of fans packed into the arena, and millions more watching from their living rooms and phones. A head coach and her franchise cornerstone locked eyes. And what followed was not a quiet professional disagreement handled with discretion. It was an open, visible, undeniable confrontation that every camera in the building captured in full and broadcast to the entire country as it was happening. Caitlin Clark was standing near the bench with her attention fixed completely on Stephanie White. She was pressing a point about something that had just happened on the floor. A defensive rotation that did not execute correctly. A set play that fell apart when it should have been clean. Whatever the specific trigger was, Clark was not prepared to move past it without getting real acknowledgement from the coach. She laid out her read of the situation. She explained what she saw. She asked for clarity in the way a franchise player has every right to ask for clarity from the person responsible for the game plan. What she received was dismissal. Stephanie White's response carried a tone that anyone who has spent time around professional athletics at a high level recognizes on contact. It was not the tone of a coach engaging with her most critical player as a partner in solving a problem. It was the tone of a superior shutting down a subordinate who has overstepped the boundaries of the conversation as the superior defines them. As if Clark's perspective on what had just occurred on the floor was a distraction to be managed, rather than intelligence to be incorporated. Clark pushed back. White cut her off. And then came the moment the entire internet stopped scrolling for. Clark threw both hands up and stepped back from the exchange. The expression on her face belongs in an entirely different category from normal regular season sideline friction. That was playoff elimination game energy. The look of a player who has not just lost faith in a specific play call or a single in-game decision, but has reached a point of fundamental doubt about whether the person across from her understands the game at the level the moment demands. And what made the moment even more revealing than the expression itself was what was happening in the orbit surrounding it. Every teammate in that huddle had their eyes pointed at the floor. The assistant coaches were shifting clipboards and paperwork, doing an expert impression of being occupied with something else entirely. Nobody in that circle wanted to exist inside that collision. And when experienced professional athletes who have spent careers navigating locker room tension go completely silent around a confrontation between their star and their head coach, that silence communicates something essential. This is not the first occurrence. The cameras simply caught this one, clean enough for the world to see it for exactly what it was. If following every shift inside this franchise is the kind of content that keeps you coming back, go ahead and subscribe right now. Every press conference development, every roster signal, every organizational decision that shapes the direction of this team gets covered here, and this story is moving too fast to miss a single update. The clip spread to every major platform within minutes, and the reaction it generated refused to follow the standard viral sports moment arc. It did not burn bright for 24 hours and then fade when the next story arrived. It became a sustained, organized conversation about authority, philosophy, and whether the coaching structure surrounding the most watched player in the sport had been designed to maximize what she is, or was structurally working against her. And to understand why that conversation landed with such lasting force, you have to understand what had been building in the weeks before the camera caught Clark's expression on that sideline. Post-game press conferences are where coaching patterns are most readable if you know how to interpret them. When veteran members of the Fever roster produced solid individual performances, Stephanie White had no difficulty finding the right language. She called specific players by name. She described them as anchors of the locker room. She praised their leadership with apparent warmth and genuine specificity. She used phrases like players who carry the identity of this franchise, and voices whose presence alone makes everyone in the building better. The recognition flowed easily, directly, and with enough detail to make clear she was actually thinking about the specific person she was describing. Now watch what happens when Caitlin Clark, the player who reframed the league's entire commercial story and brought a generation of new fans to the sport, delivers a standout night. The individual language evaporates. In its place comes collective framing, team effort, group resilience, the contributions of the entire unit. Language carefully designed to dissolve the individual within the larger whole, making it impossible to determine from the press conference alone who was actually responsible for what the audience just witnessed on the floor. For the veterans, it was names and specific recognition. For the franchise player whose presence is the primary reason most of those cameras are pointed at this building on a given night, it was the collective. That is not a team-first coaching philosophy applied with even hands. That is two entirely different standards operating simultaneously from the same podium. When a coaching communication pattern that visible operates with that kind of inconsistency, it is never random. It reveals a real internal belief about value and worth that the public language cannot fully conceal from people who are watching closely enough. Then came the Washington Mystics game, and the pattern became impossible to look past even for those who had been extending the benefit of the doubt. Clark delivered what multiple analysts, in the days that followed, called one of the most dramatic fourth-quarter performances of her professional career to that point. She was pulling up from 40 feet out. She was converting contested threes from ranges that most professional guards do not seriously include in their shot selection under normal circumstances, let alone with a game in the balance in the closing minutes. She carried her team back from a deficit that had looked entirely stable for most of the night and turned the whole thing into a wire-to-wire finish that the people inside that arena were not going to forget quickly. Every major basketball account on every platform was circulating the highlights from those final minutes for days afterward. The kind of stretch that finds its way into documentary footage later, when someone needs to explain who this player was at this point in her career and why it registered with people the way it did. Stephanie White walked to the microphone and praised the team's collective character, not Caitlin, not the specific shots that redefined what was possible inside that building on that night, not the individual decision-making that defined what the evening actually was. The group's effort, the team's collective resilience, the unit pulling together. In a moment that defied any honest description that did not center the player who made it possible, the head coach found a way to do it, and found it conspicuously enough that anyone who had been tracking the press conference pattern already knew exactly what they were watching unfold. But the press conference conduct was only one layer of what close observers had been cataloging. Because running parallel to the language choices at the podium were in-game management decisions that made the philosophical tension between this coaching staff and its franchise player increasingly difficult to attribute to anything other than a fundamental structural disconnect. The starting lineup shifted repeatedly, without logic that connected across games. Substitution patterns contradicted themselves from one night to the next. Players who were visibly in rhythm came off the floor at moments that made little tactical sense to anyone watching from outside the organization. Players clearly grinding through difficult stretches received extended runs that the results on the floor did not justify. A reporter pressed the issue directly in a press conference that received more attention than it might have under ordinary circumstances. What was driving the lineup decisions? What was the rotation philosophy? Why the continued changes to a group that needed to develop consistency? The head coach answered honestly. The staff was still experimenting, still in the process of working out which combinations produced the best results. Multiple games into the regular season, and the answer on the record was that no settled rotation existed. Consider what that actually means for the player expected to serve as the offensive fulcrum of the entire system. No consistent set of teammates to build spatial chemistry with over a run of games. No stable floor configuration to develop reliable reads around. No predictability about who is going to share the court in the moments that carry real weight. Organizational drift of that kind is not a minor inconvenience for a player like Clark. It is an active impediment to the specific elements of her game that generate her highest value output. She cannot do what she does best inside a structure that will not stabilize itself around her. Because what Caitlin Clark does best is fundamentally incompatible with slow, deliberate, possession-by-possession half-court basketball. She became the phenomenon she is by attacking before defenses can set their feet. By pulling up from ranges that require opponents to defend territory most guards never threaten, by reading screen geometry in split seconds, and making decisions that simplify the game for every teammate around her. Placing her in a system structurally opposed to those qualities is not a suboptimal deployment. It is the basketball equivalent of engineering something extraordinary for a context it was never designed to operate in, and then treating the output as a failure of the instrument rather than the framework. Independent voices in the analytical community had been making this argument with increasing directness for weeks before the sideline footage surfaced, regularly reaching for language about tactical constraints being applied as corrective pressure rather than developmental tools built to serve the player. The press conference that finally stripped away any remaining ambiguity came after what multiple observers called Clark's most efficient, most complete, most controlled performance of the season. 5 shot attempts, multiple converted deep threes, category-leading numbers across the advanced metrics that measure how a point guard creates and sustains advantages for the people around her. The complete definition of cerebral, high IQ floor leadership. A reporter handed White the perfect opening to acknowledge what had just happened on that court. To discuss court vision, to talk about the way Clark's presence in specific areas of the floor forces defensive attention to relocate in ways that benefit every other player in the lineup. Instead, the head coach reached for the word burst, athletic burst, physical burst, the vocabulary typically reserved for describing players whose primary value proposition is raw physical output rather than basketball intelligence. As if the most cognitively sophisticated guard in the professional game at this moment is fundamentally a vehicle for athleticism rather than a mind that reads and processes the game at a level that makes everyone else on the floor more effective by default. That is not careless language chosen at a tired post-game press conference. That is a deliberate framing decision. And framing decisions at a public podium send clear signals throughout a locker room about what the person holding the microphone actually believes about the player being discussed when nobody is making them say the generous thing. The sideline clip was the moment all of this became uncontainable. Within hours of the footage reaching social platforms, fan communities that had been tracking these patterns with growing frustration finally had a single piece of video requiring no interpretation, not a read between the lines, not a coded message embedded in press conference vocabulary. A direct visual of a dynamic that had been developing underneath the surface for weeks and was now impossible for anyone to look at and describe as normal. Posts demanding accountability around the coaching situation generated millions of views. Every major sports discussion space turned into an active public debate about who holds real organizational authority inside the Indiana Fever and whether the people running the franchise grasped what they were at risk of wasting. One widely circulated piece of analysis asked the hardest available question as directly as it could be asked. Had the head coach accepted this position because of her own personal history with the organization rather than any genuine vision for maximizing the generational player she inherited? That is not a verifiable claim from any public information available. No one outside the room where those decisions were made can establish what was motivating anyone. But professional sports has always operated on perception as much as on verifiable fact. And the moment a franchise's fan base begins operating under the belief that personal motivation, rather than basketball strategy, is steering the ship, the organizational pressure on the front office becomes structurally real, regardless of what the actual facts underneath look like. The Indiana Fever's ownership was watching all of this develop in real time. The clips circulating, the post-generating coordinated engagement, the unmistakable read of what the franchise's most important supporter base was communicating with consistent, unified language about what needed to change. And they made a calculation. The specific form that calculation took publicly matters less than the signal it sent. The signal was readable to everyone inside professional basketball who was paying any attention at all. The organization understood what it held in Caitlin Clark, The relationship between the current coaching philosophy and the full expression of the franchise player's development was not functioning at the level the organization's future required. The people responsible for the competitive and financial direction of this franchise were not going to allow public disrespect of their cornerstone to continue without consequence. And they made sure that position was visible to anyone who needed to understand it. In making that signal legible to the outside world, the Indiana Fever's ownership established something for this league that will outlast the immediate situation in Indianapolis. It demonstrated that the era of coaching staffs being structurally insulated from accountability at the expense of franchise talent is not a permanent feature of how professional basketball organizations operate. That if you publicly undermine a generational player in front of the cameras and the fans and the entire watching world, the organization will ultimately choose the player's future over the coaching staff's comfort and philosophical preferences. That the people who invest in this sport deserve to watch it built around the players who make it worth watching, and that the front office carries an obligation to protect that when the coaching framework fails to honor it. The question sitting in front of everyone watching now is what the resolution looks like from this point. Whether any path exists toward a functional working relationship, given how much has already been made visible in public. Whether adjustments deep enough to actually repair what has been broken are even possible within the current arrangement. Or whether the front office ultimately concludes that the philosophical incompatibility runs too far down to be bridged by any version of what is currently in place. Drop your honest read in the comments right now. Does Stephanie White survive this full season after everything that has become publicly known? Was the ownership right to send such a direct and visible signal about where the organization stands? And was Caitlin Clark justified in pushing back during that live timeout the way she did? Or should a franchise player absorb that kind of treatment and save the response for behind closed doors no matter what? Every perspective here matters, because this conversation is nowhere close to its final chapter. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the moment the next development breaks in Indianapolis, we will be here covering it, and you will want to be here when it does.